thank you very, very much for your time. We know everyone has a busy schedule, and it's a lot even to come out on a cold, dark night. And so thank you for coming tonight. This is one of two events, as you may be aware, but if you're not, this is one of two events in which we will be eliciting input from community members on the impact of climate change that could occur as Binghamton, the state, the country, and the world continues to warm. And before we begin, I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping. Obviously, an exit door here. This is an exit door. If for some reason we need to leave, you can go out either door and loop around to the doors that you entered. Restrooms are straight down the hallway. There's a restroom sign hanging from the ceiling that'll point you to the right past the elevators. Men's and women's are there, and at any time feel free to grab another beverage. In the chest box near the water, there are sodas and other cold beverages, and of course the pizza over here. Some of you are aware that there is a pre-survey in your packet. Please fill that out. There's actually 3 surveys. One that will be done at the end, and then one with the QR code, and we'll do a reminder at the end of the event for that. Would ask that cell phones be turned on vibrate. If you need to take a call, feel free to step out and take the call however long that you need. And one of my roles as MC is to keep us on track on time. And as you see, we started 10 minutes ago, but not really. So we will make up the time and have you out of here by 8:30. To help us in our transition, I've got a little ball that I will ring at the 2-minute warning before we're supposed to transition. And we will have sufficient time to catch up. So we'll begin with a welcome, as your agenda says, by Dr. Andreas Pate. Andreas holds several titles, amongst which are, he's the Associate Dean of the Graduate School, he's an Associate Professor in the Economics Department, he's the Associate Director for the Collective Dynamics of Complex Systems Research Group, and of course the Director of the Binghamton 2 Degrees Initiative. So we thank Dr. Pate for being here. He'll get up and welcome you, and then he'll introduce Dr. Mission, and then after that I'll step back up and explain a small group.
Hi, I'm Andreas Pate. As said, I'm an Associate Professor in the Economics Department. I'm the Director of Binghamton 2 Degrees. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the idea behind Binghamton 2 Degrees. So, we like to say Binghamton 2 Degrees uses art and science to ask, what will Binghamton look like under 2 degrees of warming? So, we're talking about 2 degrees, we're talking about 2 degrees Celsius globally. To put this in context, we're knocking on the door of 1.5. Pam's going to give some more details about the climate science. The part of the idea behind the initiative is that when you think about climate change, it can be really overwhelming to think about how the whole world is going to change. And so a lot of ways to get a handle on climate change, try to think in terms of thinking about it. We'll often think about one topic or a different topic, and we decide, and the idea behind Binghamton 2 Degrees is the slice of climate that we're going to take is we're going to draw a dotted line around the Binghamton community and say, like, well, what is climate change going to look like here? But from every perspective, every topic, right? We've had different topics we have these month topic events, so last month was food, this month is health, and so we're talking about climate change and health. We had an event in the end of the summer, Binghamton 2 Degrees live at Confluence Park, which is an art and music festival about climate change. We keep saying art, and so I want to mention and stress that part of it. Part of the purpose of this initiative is to envision this future world and think about the steps, different possible Binghamtons there could be in the world under 2 degrees of warming, and how we're going to get there. And one of the ways we as people envision the future is through art, right? So art is central to how the Binghamton 2 Degrees initiative, and participatory conversations like this are central to the Binghamton 2 Degrees idea. that we as a community are going to envision this future and think about the steps it takes to get there. So we want to think about how Binghamton can be a community that thrives under 2 degrees warming. And so I would like to introduce Pam Mission. Pam Mission is a professor in environmental studies and the chief sustainability officer of Binghamton University.
Thanks, Everett. All right, so I'm going to go through a lot of numbers really fast. So you have on your table, one per table, a copy of this presentation for your reference for the activity as we go along. So don't feel like you have to scribble down numbers or, I just want to kind of highlight some things that will help set the scene for the scenarios that you're going to be dealing with tonight. So we're going to start with how well you know your community. Just a little talk about climate change risk, climate change vulnerability, climate change resilience, and then kind of like what does this all mean? So I'm going to show you first of all some some data points about our community. And so when we talk about what do we mean by the community, there's a group of us on campus called the Sustainable Communities Transdisciplinary Area of Excellence, where we've been compiling a data set about community, a community data set for the country. So we have over 800 communities, and we refer to the communities as, or we use as our community designation, metropolitan and micropolitan statistical areas. So the Binghamton community for this first data set is actually Broome and Tioga counties. And you can see that the little green places in the map are metropolitan or micropolitan statistical areas. It's where 95% of the people live are in these green areas. And we put together a whole bunch of data on a number of sustainability outcomes, from human outcomes to socioeconomic outcomes as well as environmental outcomes. So when we talk about sustainability, we talk about the 3 E's of sustainability: the environment, the economy, and just kind of some background. So these are some of the data regarding the social economic sustainability indicators for Binghamton and surrounding area in comparison to the United States. So when we're thinking about moving forward, it's important to know, like, well, where are we now? And these are kind of our most recent data when it comes to poverty, unemployment, food insecurity, the percentage of people who report that they are in fair or poor health. Educational attainment is the percentage of people with a bachelor's degree or more who are age 25 and up. So it's not very high, but it's also not very high in the United States as a whole. The percentage of people who pay more than 30% of their take-home pay on rent. That's a scary number. And I think that's going to be one that we want to, I really want you to pay attention to, because I think that's going to be key as we move forward when we think about climate change. Rent and climate change, yes, there is a very strong connection between those two. Crime rate, income inequality, this is, for anybody who has a background in economics, this is called the Gini coefficient. The higher it is, the more inequitable income is. Black segregation is the percentage of people who identify as Black African American who would have to move to a different census tract for segregation to be eliminated. So you can see that we still live in a very segregated country, in a very segregated area. And broadband access, is internet access. When it comes to environmental sustainability indicators, air quality, this is measured in, this is particulate matter, so PM 2.5. And overall, the United States, with all that white space and all that clean area outside of cities is pretty good. And upstate New York generally has very good air quality. We saw an exception to that rule this summer with the wildfires in Canada affecting our air quality here locally. Water quality, it's the percentage of the stream length that is impaired in some way. So that could be from sewage, it could be from legacy pollution from manufacturing, it can be Agricultural runoff is another big one for comparing. And we can see that we are higher in this area than the nation as a whole. And that's because we are older in terms of our development. And we've had we have a history of manufacturing. Water stress is generally not a problem. This is an index. Anything that's less than 0.1 indicates that we don't have water stress, and this whole area is free of water stress. Greenhouse gas emissions per person are generally pretty low, lower than average in the United States, and that's because we're in New York State, and New York has really pushed for a greener grid and lower CO2 emissions. The Oneonta, being more rural, has a higher GHG emissions per capita. And then the percentage of natural land cover. So this is by ecoregion. And what's left in those ecoregions that is still intact in parcels of 500 acres or more. So we can see that we actually live in an area that has pretty good natural land cover. So that's the overall view of what our area looks like when it comes to sustainability.
So that's undeveloped land?
It cannot be agriculture and it cannot be developed. It has to be
Neither of those.
neither of those. So the next set of data I'm going to show you are all related to climate change. Now we're going to start looking forward, what might be happening. And I can provide this presentation to anybody who wants a copy of it, and so you can explore these links at your leisure. But I've pulled some of the data for you for this area. And so when we look at this area, so we get Broome, Tioga, Otsego, Stratton, Portland, just to get a sense, it's not just here in the Binghamton area. We can look at a number of different risks. So when it comes to, so FEMA has put out a risk index, and this is based on the annual expected losses, right? So how much money are we going to have to pay out locally because of disasters? And you can see that Broome is relatively moderate. And we've had some big payouts in recent history, whereas the rest of the area is relatively low to very low. USCR is the U.S. Climate Resilience, is looked at river flooding, heat, and extreme precipitation, and both drought and wildfire all come from the same data set. And despite the fact that we've had a couple of big floods in recent history, it's still low to medium risk event. It's not something that we can expect to happen on a regular basis, but we know that it can happen. We can see that it's actually much more likely that we're going to have more heat. So global warming is going to actually warm our area. And we are going to have more high precipitation events. So this is more than 1 inch in a day. Drought, which is interesting because how can you have high precipitation and drought at the same time? It's because we're going to see a shift potentially in rainfall, where our summers may become drier and our winters wetter, which is problematic for agriculture. So we could actually have summer drought followed by extreme precipitation events. We still expect to have low to medium wildfire risk. Probably not too much water stress, but again, because of the seasonality, we could end up in an area in Broome County, we could end up having water stress because the water isn't going to come in a uniform, the rain's not going to come uniformly all year long. And then when it comes to hurricanes, again, we don't expect to see much coming this far inland, but there could be some counties around here that do see some of that hurricane activity. So now we're going to move on to some numbers, some specific numbers in terms of climate projections for mid-century, and these are under low and high emission scenarios. So this is the number of days that we expect it to be more than 90 degrees, and in parentheses is the deviation from normal, from the last decade or so. So we can see it is going to get warmer. We are going to have, even under a low emission scenario, we're going to have 13 more days by mid-century where it's over 90 degrees on average. The average high temp is going to be 97 to 98, 99 degrees in Broome County. It's uncomfortable, but not life-threatening. In a lot of places we hear about wet bulb temperatures where the combination of heat and humidity actually leads to life-threatening conditions if you're not in an air-conditioned environment. It's probably not going to happen in this area, but it is going to get warmer. You can see also more precipitation, more higher precipitation days. When we look at late centuries, this is 2070 to 2099 under low and high emission scenario, it only gets worse, right? So this is not something that's going to stop happening. Even if we stop putting CO2 in the atmosphere now, we have made a climate commitment that some of these things are going to happen. Even if we stop now, and we're not stopping now. I read an article in the New York Times at the end of last week. 2030 is projected to have more coal, oil, and gas production in 2030 than we do today. We're going the wrong direction. Right? So I'm looking at these high emission scenarios and thinking that's the direction we're heading right now. You know, if we don't kind of come together and do something about this. High emission scenario puts us at 105 degrees potentially in this region as a high temperature for the year. I mean, that's like, I don't know, it's hard to imagine, but that's kind of the direction that we're heading. And then when it comes to vulnerability, right, we have, you know, Broome County, because we have a high, from those earlier slides, higher rates of poverty, higher rates of food insecurity, and other risk factors, we are at a relatively high social vulnerability. We're in a relatively high social vulnerability area, right? So we're not necessarily going to be able to cope with these changes as well as some of the surrounding areas. And that's a combination of factors: the socioeconomic status, household composition and disability, minority status and language, housing type, and transportation. All kind of factor in our ability to manage these changes in climate and potential natural disasters. And so then finally, when we think about climate change resilience, what do we have working for us? Despite us being also have high vulnerabilities, we have a pretty good governmental response system. And so we have very high resilience as well, right? So we have the ability, maybe because we've had a couple of big floods here, we've had some practice here, unfortunately, to be able to recover from these events.
So is that our county emergency services mainly?
There are a number of factors that go into that, but it's largely it is our ability as in terms of governmental response. Yes.
More than just
Not just emergency services. Yeah. So in a lot of ways, it actually sounds like we're kind of in like okay shape, right? I mean, nowhere in the world is in good shape, but we're not experiencing hurricanes. We're not going to experience coastal flooding. It's going to get warmer, but it's not going to be dangerously hot. So we're okay. We're going to be okay, right? Well, what's there to worry about? We have to just expand our view just a little bit to see what there is to know about. So if we look beyond just our immediate upstate area and start looking at what else is happening nearby. This is coastal flooding, right? So we can see that there are a lot of folks here who are going to be subject to coastal flooding. What else is going to happen to the folks near us? Well, if this is hurricane risk, you can also see significant hurricane risk also along the coast. So, and finally, this is the page that had where I got the temperature projections. This is New York City's temperature projections. So where we were at 50 days above 90 degrees in a high emissions late century scenario, they're at 75. In fact, they're at 5.6 days above 105. It has become incredibly uncomfortable in New York City. So where are these folks going to go when a couple of hurricanes hit? When one potentially when the temperature is unbearable. They're gonna go someplace. They're gonna come here. They're gonna move inland, they're gonna come upstate. What we've seen with wildfires in California is people generally don't move very far, they just go far enough to get out of harm's way. We're far enough out of harm's way. So we may not experience a lot of the direct impacts of climate change, but we may experience a lot of indirect effects in terms of being a place where people show up. And because they cannot live where they have been living before. And so climate change is going to affect everybody, everywhere, and what it looks like is going to be different based on where you live. If anybody wants to know where they should move, Binghamton's not a bad area. Minnesota, strangely, North Dakota, are probably the safest places in the United States, just in case you needed to know where that was going to be. Again, all these, now this you can only get if you have a New York Times subscription, so that's why I decided to put this up there for you to see. We're in, for us, largely, climate change is going to look like extreme rainfall. But we're close to areas where it's going to look like sea level rise, hurricanes, and things that really, make life more difficult for people. So what are our possible futures? We may see migration. We may see people coming, and we are already seeing migration. People may not know this, but we are seeing climate migrants showing up here already. We're seeing international migration. We're going to see domestic migration as well. There is a very strong potential that we will have food shortages because of these changes globally. When you think about what do we produce here in New York, we have 6% of the national population. And we produce less, the only thing we produce more than 6% of is dairy. So we'll have milk, but we don't produce a lot of the produce that we eat. That's coming from someplace else. And this is just domestic production. You also have to consider that 60% of U.S. fruit consumption and 38% of vegetable consumption comes from is imported. So we may see food shortages. We may see, if nothing else, increases in food prices, significant increases in food prices. So summing up, when thinking about our climate future, remember we have to take into account not just the local climate risks, but our local climate resilience, our local climate vulnerabilities, and also the regional, national, and international forces that are going to impact our area. Did I do it on time? I told you I was going to speed through it, but it's all here for you, and so as you're going through your scenarios, feel free to reference this, and if you have any other questions or you want some additional information or more explanations, I will be wandering the room and answer questions as you need to.
You did fantastic, thank you very much.
Going to applaud climate change.
I've had the opportunity to serve with people from the Mental Health Network, and of course the other variable in this is the workforce.
Yeah.
So those who are helping to produce that food, the workforce is changing, it's a changing factor. So for the next hour, we're going to go into our breakout groups. You see we have if I can count correctly, 4 tables and 4 facilitators. There are 2 different scenarios, and there will be 2 tables that have scenario 2, and 2 tables that have scenario 1. Scenario 1's impact is about the impact of sustained torrential rainfall and the migration issues associated with that. And the other scenario is about the sustained high temperatures and other impacts around that. The questions are very similar in each scenario, and in each scenario there are 2 parts. So I'll spend about 30 minutes on the first part, and then I'll get to do my little reading, and then we'll spend 30 minutes on the second part, and then around 8 o'clock we will have some report outs, first by scenario 1 and then by scenario 2. There's a facilitator at each table. Here we have Emily, we have Tom in the back, Jude in the center, and Chris Christine here in the back corner. And amongst yourselves at the table, you can decide how you might want to take notes on the questions and whether you would like the facilitator to report out or if you would like somebody else from your table to report out. And let me just look at my notes and make sure that I've not missed anything. So I don't think I've missed anything. The report out time frame will be about 4 minutes per table. So choose your most salient items, and if there's something another table has already said, you can just say ditto and then do what you think is most important to report out. Andreas, did I miss any pertinent instructions?
I don't think so. So we're reading the scenario at each table?
At each table, yes. Yeah, and I think I'll just let the facilitators indicate which scenario they have.
And Yvonne and I are gonna come around and collect your pre-tests. So that if you haven't done the survey yet, the first survey, please take the time to do that now. It should only take a couple of minutes. And I have extra pens here, if anybody needs a pen.
Above 90 degrees for like 90 days. And we also have poor air quality due to wildfire smoke coming from wildfire smoke coming from out of the area. So we've got that combination of extended periods of high temperature and a very poor air quality, which is harmful to everyone. In addition to that, we have a situation where we've got an influx of immigrants coming into the area. So, coming from other parts of the country, but really more directly coming from New York City into our community. So, there are 100 people who are coming to Binghamton in the context of this. So, the first question that we talked about is what health issues are we concerned about in this scenario, both physical and mental well-being. And we talked about kind of the maybe obvious issues in terms of physical health, of respiratory issues that people have, existing asthma, existing COPD, chronic conditions that people have that might be exacerbated in a period of high temperature and poor air quality. And then, given that we know that just the changing environment, we know that those are issues that they might be pre-existing or they might kind of come up and prevalence is expanding due to the changing environment. We also know that people who use tobacco of any form are more, they would be more impacted by this. And we even thought, well, maybe a younger population could be like newly impacted by this just because of changing patterns of tobacco use. Okay, so part of the another dimension of this, maybe not so short term, but just impact on the food supply related to the high temperature and poor air quality. There might be algae blooms, changing recreational opportunities due to the weather, and stress on the energy systems due to the temperatures, and then higher energy costs. So those were our initial health issues that we thought of. In terms of mental well-being, we know that heat and just kind of discomfort can impact emotional distress, just rising anxiety during that 2-week period of time. And also just, in a period of migration, we know that the migrants themselves would have higher levels of stress, but also the communities that they're coming into might experience distress due to changing demands on local resources, kind of economic impacts related to those fluctuations and
Okay, why don't you hit on, a couple items for the part two? Take maybe 2 minutes and then we'll go to Tom, because we do have a little bit of wiggle room here.
Sure. Okay, so in terms of community assets that we thought would be useful during the heat wave and the period of poor quality, poor air quality. So we thought about kind of the obvious things of identifying cooling centers. Churches might be good. Our downtown arena. We thought using elementary schools that are in the area just because they're scattered neighborhoods and we want to obviously be accessible to people where they are. Grocery stores might be an option, but I'm not sure if that would work out that well. Also, we have areas that don't really have any grocery stores. We thought we should leverage cooling assistance. So, we have heating assistance programs, but we want to be able to also subsidize energy costs that we're moving for cooling. And we also want to leverage new technology. Jerry also brought up the portable heat pumps that I don't know anything about, but could be really useful in not just in single family homes, but perhaps apartment buildings if they're set up that way. We also thought about regulations that we need to adjust our labor conditions and what people, what work environment people should be subjected to during periods of high temperatures and poor air quality. And also kind of modifying our emergency alert system to incorporate air quality changes and being able to forecast air quality changes.
Great. Super. Thank you.
To repeat some stuff that's said. So a lot of it are the same things that we talked about. I think in addition to some of the fears about existing chronic conditions and exacerbations in some vulnerable populations, we also noted that there might be an uptick in infectious and vector-borne diseases, maybe with the prolonged heat. There's a greater tick population, there might be an increase in Lyme infections. In addition, it might be hard to get rid of food waste due to the rising temperatures, and there would be an increase in varmints and varmint droppings, and probably an uptick in infectious diseases, and maybe the younger population would even be more susceptible to those. And for the vector-borne diseases, maybe the vulnerable populations that have to work outside, in addition to their just exposure to the heat and to the pollution in itself. We also mentioned many of the same mental conditions that people would experience. We also noted there might be an uptick in irritability and domestic violence due to the rising temperatures and maybe the anxiety and the stress that's created from not being able to go outside. And to think about if someone's in an abusive relationship and then they're cut off from healthcare access because of the heat or restrictions around air pollution, and they don't have an outlet to go to, it might be creating the environment where they're more susceptible to experiences of abuse from their abuser. With some other ones we mentioned, depression. I don't know if you guys mentioned depression, but we also noted there might be an uptick in depression because of increased indoor time. And then a worry about development in general from young populations. So if it's really hot outside and there's air pollution and they can't be physically active, there are those peak periods of bone and muscle formation that younger people might be missing out on. So if you were to do a study that maybe a decade later, in addition to the familiar chronic conditions, you might see an uptick in osteoporosis or sarcopenia in populations as young as 20 and 30 years old, in addition to increase in adiposity due to potential sedentariness. Let's see, many of the same resources. We spent, I think, a good deal of time about how do we get information out to people in terms of early warning systems, in terms of air pollution, and heat and the dangers of heat stroke. The need for collaboration in the community, going to our community resources, many of the same ones you talked about. We did churches, elementary schools. Let's open up cooling centers, let's get mask out, let's put restrictions on how frequently people have to work outside if it's hot and the air is really polluted. Steve mentioned something really interesting, and that was probably trying to promote people going into basements, because that's probably much cooler than the rest of the house. So if people have access to basements and they can't get to like a cooling center, it was a really I think no one else had thought of that one. So that's a good contribution from Steve. What was some other ones? Am I missing anything in terms of our resources? There's so much that we talked about. I think that is a good summary from now. I know we probably need to move on to another group.
Can I just
Thank
one
you.
more
Yes,
point?
please.
I think part of the thing we talked a lot about, and came up in your as well as our summaries, is trying to turn this into a long-term and a short-term perspective. We talked about what, how many days? A lot of things we need to talk about, as you presented, was then this could be long-term, how you child development, things like that. So it's kind of hard in the scenario to think about the sort of snapshot of time, of what that would look like. So it's just,
That's a great insight, and if it peaks over periods.
Ooh, I gotta throw one more in then also. And this was Lonnie's thing. She talked that we are group. You can't just be reactive, because there are definite vulnerable groups. We also need to be addressing the underlying issues of inequities, especially if people are coming in from other places. Will they have jobs? Do they have a support network? Who's here to provide that sort of support network, and to create maybe to get rid of biases and stereotypes and anger feeling towards people that are climate refugees.
Great, thank you. Fantastic.
Improve their ventilation and get filtration systems if we're gonna have fires and kids are gonna be in school without. Having people windows closed and breathe air.
Great comments, thank you.
Climate impacts and response. So for our scenario, it's 2070. There's been 4 to 5 days of record-breaking rainfall. There was flooding of streams and a surge in population from New York City as temperatures there have skyrocketed and hurricanes have occurred, and sea level has risen to cover 1% of the land of New York City. So the people with means from New York City kind of moved in first, and which doubled the median home price. And now there's vulnerable populations that are arriving without resources, and to about 1,000 people to the Binghamton area per year that are moving in, and home prices are very high. And we have this record flooding. So I'll hand it over to Kevin now to talk about the other aspects.
Sure. Yeah, so I think first we just looked into some health issues, I guess pretty much in the immediate sense of as a response to this event of flooding and high rain. So one thing might be respiratory issues brought up by mold, allergies associated with that would be exacerbated by all the wet weather. Infection as well, caused by potentially contaminated water. Anytime you have flooding, there's going to be contamination of the water. And also with growing population densities, people being in closer quarters, people coming in from elsewhere where they might be having some sort of outbreak or just exposed to illnesses that are already in the community, as well as particularly people with less resources potentially being in more cramped conditions. Insect-borne illness, and exactly malaria from mosquitoes, increased stress during a time of emergency, resulted mental health effects, anxiety, depression, as well as depression being exacerbated by just dark, gloomy weather, not being able to be outside, and the lack of outdoor activity, and then also just injury and death itself brought on by flooding. You swept away in your car, traffic accidents because the roadways are wet. And we kind of went through and thought about who would be most affected by this. And I think kind of the core concept is people who lack access to healthcare, to housing, to food. And so I think those groups are pretty unsurprising. Low socioeconomic status, people with lower education or access to education, this kind of goes beyond the elderly, but anyone who needs this type of care, like oxygen, we need a power supply and supply of oxygen for that. And then Black Indigenous people of color, obviously well documented the historical inequities there, just being exacerbated by an emergency situation such as this, and the larger systemic changes of climate change. So for part two, we talked a lot about just being proactive. One thing is trying to move people out of flood-prone areas, which is happening a bit in this area, or building raised houses there, or flood walls, and also work on the land management piece. So an example being on Tudor Street, we have the Binghamton Urban Farm. So that is in a flood area. Farmland is much more resilient than housing is to flooding. And then we also have more resilient food supply since we have a farmer in town. Also making sure we have affordable housing, especially as people are moving in, and maybe people with more resources who can afford to pay more. But having the population here where we have way higher poverty than the national average, and the later waves of people with less resources being driven out of where they were living. We need to make sure everyone has affordable housing, as well as emergency preparedness and just the individual education aspect of that. Having somewhere people can go in an emergency situation, making sure they're aware of it. So I heard the event center on the BU campus is one spot for that. Making sure we have local emergency plans, because there are federal response plans, but those things are going to get stressed as climate change worsens and we see more of these extreme natural disasters and other scenarios. Making sure like our first responders, for one example, have some flood-friendly transportation, I put it as, includes helicopters, kind of hard to drive cars, trucks, etc. through flooding. Not putting important things on low floors, so this is one thing we have, like our server room in our office is on the second floor, because we're over on 4th Street where there have been flooding in the past. We were talking about how some hospitals have the pharmacy in the basement, and in flood-prone areas you can't do that. Well, so we went back to the education and awareness piece, especially with new community members, making sure they know the resources, where to access them. And finally, we thought a little bit about what we can do as individuals to prevent extreme weather events. And in a way, we said not much because it's extreme weather, but there are things we can do to try to mitigate climate change, driving over emission cars, things like that, as well as advocating at a higher level for this climate mitigation before we get to these worst case scenarios. One example being transitioning to more green energy.
Great, thank you.
Good job.
In addition, everyone said all the points that we have made just about, with the exception of many of the people at this table have lived through 2 floods here. And we come at it from the perspective of what that was like. And it was absolutely overwhelming. Things that we learned and things that we can, I think, help the community with is to ask folks to have a grab and go bag. So in your grab and go, you should have, your deed, your insurance information, etc. You should have an updated medication list and an updated problem list, so that when you end up in the event center with a gun, because your cane has been taken away from you. And she said people became total care because they didn't have the equipment they needed as they got moved in to the event center. So right now, I think we as providers can reach out and say, get ready, get a grab and go bag, get your medications, even have a small supply, a 5-day supply of the medications that you cannot do without. We talked about what it would be like to be a 80-year-old lady on the 2nd floor. and I was blessed with 2 BU students. And they indicated that there would be interest from BU at a group getting together and saying, okay, where does Mrs. Brown live and what does she have, what support does she have? Has anybody seen her? And I was reading a book that this was done in another city, and they had given, the college students had given all the elderly patients little sticky things, and they would put it on their window. And red means I need water, blue means I need food, orange means I'm okay. But that sort of thing, if we can get that going now, that would be potentially helpful. Then Joe came and talked to us a little bit about his garden and talked about monoculture. And we have a garden, and frankly, it's all the same. So Joe is right. If everyone in this room had their own garden, we could start taking care of ourselves. And we serve as an example. Samantha's a vegetarian, and she shared that, she has friends and they watch her. Well, if we all dug in and raised our own food, dried our clothes on clothes racks rather than a dryer, bicycle, take public transportation, etc., people are watching. So I think our group tried to do a little bit of take-home messages, and that was our take-home message.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, because this will be used, I'm getting right there. This will be used for you to help decide what are the next steps and how can we be impactful in either getting additional grants, resources. Is this kind of input from the community valuable in helping to prepare the individual and us as a community for disasters such as that? And so we really appreciate your being here. If you know anyone that would like to participate in the 29th event, please feel free to pass on that information and they can register for that. That would be at the pharmacy school in Johnson City. There is a post survey. We ask you to fill that out. There's also, mind if I pick up this real quick? There's also this QR code. This is a different survey that takes you to something for the Binghamton 2 degrees. So if you could take a moment, whether it's tonight or a different time, to do that, that would be super. So I'd just like to ask, in closing, before I turn it back over to Andreas for some closing remarks, what went well tonight that you would recommend we continue for the event on the 29th? You can name one thing. Of course, there's lots of you, so it'll really be more than one thing. But what went well that should be continued?
I've done, this is the third Binghamton 2 degrees event I've done. The first one with a table discussion like this, so that's very helpful.
So the table discussion was meaningful. Okay, thank you. If there was one thing we could change to make it even more effective for the meeting on the 29th, what would that be?
No solution for this, but I said everyone here is intelligent, caring, and progressive. How do we get the people here that need to hear? How do we reach other populations? Decision makers that I don't know what answer to that. It's
Well,
the age-old
yeah.
question.
Yeah, and it's a great one. So think about your circle of influence and expand that for the invitation. But that's also part of the takeaway of how other resources can be leveraged in the future to replicate this. Jude?
Yeah, I know maybe this is more for those of us that are facilitators. And I think we have a pretty highly educated group here, but for the 29th we'll have a lot more students. I think we just need to be mindful of using a lay language, and so that we make sure that the students don't feel like that they don't understand what we're talking about. So just a couple times I noticed we could use a lay language a little bit better.
Great, thank you. Thanks. All right, so I'll turn it over to. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just one thing I appreciated, listen to Christine speak and someone who's experienced different events in this community. I learned a lot just from listening to you. That was really, for me, it's one of the best benefits. Same thing with Steve, the recommendations that he had, that things I never thought of beforehand.
Well, Dr. Fenlon, we're counting on you to help us with all the infectious diseases that we talked about tonight.
Oh, better get some coffee.
Well, we'll grow it.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Andreas?
Yeah, so as you're doing your final, the survey, professor head, I guess. So, I just wanted to say a few things wrapping up about this event. First of all, obviously, thank you all for coming. This kind of participation is a lot of what Binghamton 2 Degrees is about, right? And one of the things we like to say is trying to make climate change more present and pressing, not something distant and abstract, but something that is part of our lives now. I mean, it already is changing, but it still feels, I think, for lots of people, something that is going to occur sometime in the future. And so these kinds of conversations, this kind of participation, I think is part of the cultural change that will help us be more prepared for climate change and also help prevent it, right? So these kinds, I hear you loud and clear, Susie, about like broadening this conversation outside of people who already feel strongly about it. But I think that some of it is, practicing these kind of conversations where you're with your people who you don't know and you're practicing these conversations about what climate change is going to be like, so it'll be easier next time when you're talking to someone who you don't know about what climate change is going to be like, and that it's not something abstract, it's not something distant, but something that we can think about and talk about every day. So I really, honestly, on a personal level, appreciate all of you coming here. This is a very, personal initiative to me. This is we're trying to build a community that's going to thrive under climate change, and so you're my plan. So thanks.